Um, I was born and raised in the northwest of Pakistan, and so initially I went to school and university there. So in Pakistan, law degrees are postgraduate degrees. So I had a BA in law and politics, and then I went and did my LLB, and then I did an MA in politics before I came to the United Kingdom, and then I did my LLM and my doctoral research at the University of Hull. But in addition to my purely sort of academic qualifications, if you will, I've been called upon many times to provide what is called expert legal opinion in courts. And I've done that in a variety of jurisdictions as well, so the UK and the USA in particular. I joined Warwick Law School in September 1998. So that's 26 years and counting. So really throughout my academic life in the UK, Warwick's really been my academic intellectual home. I love to be with people. I enjoy discussions, conversations, sharing knowledge and experience. And so that is probably why academia was the perfect fit for me, because I really love to be with students and colleagues and to be in class and to engage. And so I guess really I've been fortunate for my hobby and for my passion to be my job as well. I work at the intersection of Islamic law, international human rights law, women's rights, children's rights, minority rights. And as a Muslim woman, born and raised in the northwest part of Pakistan for most of my adult life, traveling a lot, working internationally, coming into Britain, becoming a British Muslim, all of these really played a huge role in why and how I've been engaged in this area of research of mine. And obviously there were so many stereotypes regarding Islam, regarding Islamic law, regarding Muslim women, regarding Pakistani women. And so I guess the more I engaged with people, the more my areas of research deepened and focused on these three main areas, because I was breaking myths, I was breaking the stereotypes of the very vulnerable, forever oppressed Muslim woman kind of thing. And I'd walk into class and say, well, look at me, do I look like I'm oppressed? Likewise, my research interest became even deeper, because what was my research interest was also in a sense personal to me in my life and how I lived my life as a British Muslim woman of Pakistani origin. So there were so many multiple identities that I was navigating that this itself became a very rich and a diverse area of interest. And every day going into the classroom, interacting on Islamic law, interacting on women's human rights, furthers that inspiration and focus for me. So for me, my research is a reflection of my own life, but it's also the reflection of the rich experiences that I gain in the classroom, that I gain outside with colleagues, with people around me. Well, for me, my teaching philosophy really and approach is that teaching is student-centered, but it's interactive and it's got to be a happy, fruitful and productive experience for both the teacher and the taught. And so when we put students at the center of this exercise of teaching and learning, then it's very important to bring in experiences of real life and diversity from outside academia to inform upon law and how law is actually applied. So I've been just very fortunate in that I've always been an activist, what you might call an activist academic, and a lot of my research and a lot of my activism comes back into the classroom with me and informs my teaching. And so it breathes life, if you will, into what may be just bookish knowledge out there, and a lecture that is just simply talking about and the law says this and the law says that, is hardly of interest to students at that age. But if you intersperse it and bring real life experiences from the field into the classroom, that is what really brightens up their faces, and they're so eager and for all these stories. So, for example, just to give an example, in terms of how are laws actually made? What are the processes? Obviously, if I was just an academic with no experience of the outside world, no experience of ever having tried my hand at writing a statute, I wouldn't have been able to bring that into the classroom. But I had the good fortune of being the first woman cabinet minister in the northwest of Pakistan, and I tried my hand at reforming the health sector and writing laws and rules and regulations and policies. And so I could bring that into the classroom and say, look, when we say political will is required to make a law, or public, there needs to be public demand, community demand, different constituencies demanding something, what does that actually mean? And so I can bring my own story and I can say, look, when I was cabinet minister for health, I noticed XYZ gaps in the laws. I saw this discriminatory attitude towards women workers. I felt that there weren't enough female toilets in institutions. And so all these women workers, they were spending half their lives just trying to hold back and not wait until they got home to go to a toilet. And so I had the opportunity to actually implement what is meant equal access to facilities in the workplace, for example. Then, as the first chair of the National Commission on the Status of Women in Pakistan, I actually found out for myself as I was writing the law how one can actually translate and transform the law on paper into law in practice. And so I actually had the opportunity of writing a law that would set up an institution called the National Commission on the Status of Women in Pakistan, which was a watchdog sitting outside government. And so when I bring this into my women's human rights course, they're absolutely amazed and enthralled at, oh my God, so this is how it happens in the real world. A final example I'll give you is that of my membership and vice chair of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, where I sat on a UN committee and received complaints from just about anybody in any part of the world saying that they have been arbitrarily detained. So either they bring in the complaint, or somebody, their family members or someone brings it a complaint on their behalf. Here again, going through the inquisitorial process, the adversarial process, trying to develop an understanding of how governments actually either apply or not apply, fail to apply the safeguards of people they are detaining and holding in custody. And so bringing that into the classroom and saying, well, we know about human rights, we know about the human rights documents, here is how they are actually applied on the ground. So I think for me, this has been a very, very fulfilling part of my career, where I have been able to match the reality with the theory. So the theory and practice going hand in hand. And I think the fact that I was actually sitting on these international bodies um, and come back to the classroom, making it a more rich and deep experience for my students. Well, basically, I seem to always have my hands full with all sorts of projects. So they're either based on my various positions that I hold internationally, or my what I would call my normal standard research projects. So I'll just give you a taste of three of these. So the first one is on Islamic, and I put this in inverted commas, Islamic constitutionalism. I just published an article which says why adjectives matter. And it's actually challenging the very use of the term Islamic in constitutions and constitutionalism in the Muslim world. And I'm challenging that on the basis of extensive fieldwork that I've done, on the basis of extensive case law, its application, and laws and constitutions, where I'm arguing that this uncritical use of Islamic to just everything and anything in the Muslim world is actually unproductive and doesn't really lead you anywhere, and it doesn't really add to the discourse, because there is so much variation and so much pluralism in the use of this word. Now, why is it that this is important to challenge and to question and to explore as research? It is because of the implications. Because the minute you use the adjective Islamic, it almost becomes an open and shut case, and it prevents any discussion or challenge or debate on the subject. Whereas, because people think this is divine and Islamic equals divine and you can't challenge the divine, so it goes good Muslims you can't question. But if you question the very adjective Islamic by saying, but on what basis are you actually using it? So this article was so well received, and I was asked if I could kind of expand on this, and I'd been thinking along similar lines. So now this is expanded into kind of almost like a global project where I'm writing a monograph, and I'm going to cover the wide range of Muslim countries, from Indonesia to Malaysia to Kuwait to Pakistan, to Senegal to Saudi Arabia. So that's kind of one project that's in one pocket. Then I have two other projects that are more on the international stage, as it were. So the performance is really on the international stage. Last year, the president of the UN Human Rights Council chose myself along with two other members, and we are the International Independent Fact-Finding Mission on Iran. And 2 years ago, the reason why this mandate was set up and this international commission was set up was for us to investigate the alleged human rights violations by the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the death in custody of a 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish woman, Jina Mahsa Amini. And so because of this movement known as the Women Life Freedom Movement, which really took the entire country by storm, and there were hundreds of people dead and then in custody, and it really took the whole world by storm, as it were, which is why the international community charged us, 3 members, to investigate this. So here, of course, my research work, my research expertise as somebody who's an Islamic lawyer, international human rights lawyer, women's rights lawyer, all of that expertise is coming to bear on this investigation. We've already produced about a 400-page report to the international community early this year, and now next year in 2025, we're actually on our way to produce another report and a conference room paper, which we will present before the international community next spring with our findings. So right now, we're in the middle of investigations and research, and this, of course, Although it's very useful, it's very valuable, but it's also very saddening and sobering because we're dealing with investigation of human rights violations and we're talking of human suffering. We're tabulating and documenting human suffering on the ground. Of course, from my perspective as an academic, I've already used some of these experiences in my class on women's human rights this spring. And for me, I think it will also be a learning experience to take back into the classroom as to what our findings are. So that's my second project, which is actually the Activist Academic Interface project. And there's a third project also, which early this year, I was made a member of an expert panel called the International Independent Panel on Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations. And this mission or mandate was sponsored by the Government of Canada, and it's been supported by at least 70 other countries in the world, where our panel, as experts in international law, have been asked to produce a report assessing existing international law on how states can arbitrarily detain foreign nationals or even their own nationals in order to acquire or obtain some kind of advantage over another country. And so, as you can imagine, this is complex, but this is sensitive. And it's because it involves state sovereignty, it involves international human rights law, and relationship between different sovereign nations. So we're already well into the first year of this mandate, and we're hoping to produce our report to the Government of Canada by next June. This again, as you can imagine, will be very useful for me as an academic and for me as a teacher, because all of this experience I can take back to my students, and my students end up writing their dissertations on it, or they choose essay topics on it. So for me, really, all of this international work, the insights that I gain as a researcher or as a member of these prestigious bodies, I feel comes back full circle into Warwick and into the classroom. And it's very heartening to see my students feeling so engaged with all that's happening, because as you can appreciate, a lot of this is kind of hot off the press. It's as it's happening in real time. I'm coming back from my international meetings and I'm saying, well, look, this is the stuff that happened. This is how states operate with each other. This is how human rights activists have a role to play. This is how NGOs have a role to play. And of course, they're very interested because they themselves are aspiring human rights lawyers, or they want to work for NGOs, they want to work for government. So these are sort of some of the insights that I can give you relating to my research projects.